Over the past decade or so, some unscrupulous reporters at tabloid newspapers in the United Kingdom hacked into the voicemails of celebrities and other newsmakers. That is, they would find out the phone numbers of these people, then crack their voicemail passwords, and then they would listen to the voice messages these people month after month, even year after year. The targets of this hacking didn't even know about that for the longest time. They must have wondered how their most intimate secrets became front page fodder. They must have distrusted their friends or even began to distrust themselves. But in truth, they were being spied on illegally. Now, most of the targets were celebrities, and much of the news was skullduggery, illicit affairs, drunken scandals. But occasionally it was grotesque. The voicemail of a murdered schoolgirl was hacked. Relatives of deceased British soldiers had their voicemails hacked. Rupert Murdoch's newspapers received the most scrutiny for their use of these illegal tactics because Rupert Murdoch's conservative. But there are plenty of left-wing tabloids in the UK too, and they're just as fiercely competitive. The tactic was widespread, and credible allegations have been made even against left-wing former editor of The Mirror, now in America, who goes by the name of Piers Morgan, though he denies the allegations. Now, it is already a crime to hack into someone's voicemail or email or their regular snail mail. It's illegal to tap their phones or to plant bugs in their houses or cars. These are already laws on the books, criminal laws and also civil lawsuits. And of course, the United Kingdom is one of the most highly respected court systems in the world. There were plenty of remedies to be had, both by embarrassed celebrities and ordinary people too. And in fact, that has been the case. Tabloid newspapers have paid out millions of dollars in legal settlements. But to a government, a crisis is an opportunity to grow in power and budget and bureaucrats. After all, this surely was a crisis. And if Hugh Grant, the actor, wasn't sympathetic enough, well, what about poor Millie Dowler, that murdered girl I mentioned? Surely we need Millie's Law. Yeah, let's call it that. I mean, we know why Hugh Grant hates a free press. Remember when they caught him cheating on his wife in his car with a prostitute? Yeah, maybe not the most sympathetic lobbyist for press censorship, but remember Millie. Let's do it for the children. What, you don't care about murdered children? And so the celebrities who hate the paparazzi and who prefer a regulated press to a vibrant one cooked up a lobby group with the Millie Dowlers at the front, but their big celebrity money behind it. And they demanded a public inquiry called the Levant Inquiry, which was so lucky to have the evil Rupert Murdoch as its public enemy number one. Who could be against Millie and who could be for that evil billionaire Rupert Murdoch? Well, what was to be done? I mean, it's already illegal to hack someone's phone or otherwise breach their privacy. And sorry, Hugh, you're not entitled to privacy when you're having sex in your car at the side of the road. Well, that's where the ingenuity of British politicians came in. The problem, they claimed, was phone hacking. But the solution was not banning phone hacking. That's already done. Their solution was government regulation of the press, something that had never been done for centuries in the United Kingdom. Now, this wasn't done in open parliament, this censorship. This wasn't subject to debate or scrutiny by that same press they sought to regulate. This was done literally at midnight in a secret deal amongst all of Britain's party leaders. They literally cooked up their censorship package all night, with the Prime Minister himself signing off on the deal after 2:30 a.m. with a text message. Yeah, in the dead of night. Oh, and the deal that's proposed will have a special supermajority built in. It will need a 2/3 vote of Parliament to ever be undone. Why? Well, let me quote from my favorite UK politician, the Mayor of London, widely expected to challenge David Cameron one day soon to be the head of the Tory party. Johnson used to be a newspaper editor. He still writes a column for The Telegraph. Here's an excerpt from his great column on the subject of this press censorship. He starts off by saying why London is the financial capital of Europe and maybe the world. And he concludes that it's because the government is the cleanest in the world, the least corruption or bribery. And then he explains why. And because Johnson is such a great writer, let me quote him at length, and I quote, "You cannot hope to win a contract in London by sending a public official a Rolex. And that's because that public official would be too amazed to accept, too honorable to accept, and above all, too terrified to accept. British business and British politics and the nexus between business and politics have been kept cleaner than in virtually all other countries because for centuries we have had a free press." And here's my favorite part. "Like any strong detergent, the work of the British media may cause a certain smarting of the eyes. But if you want to keep clean the gutters of public life, you need a gutter press, unquote. Isn't that the truth? Johnson's point is that you need vigorous, unbridled, competitive, aggressive journalists because you've got vigorous, unbridled, competitive, aggressive politicians who are just flesh and bone. They're just as sinful and susceptible to making the same bad choices the rest of us are. Johnson says you need journalists in the gutter to fight politicians who are in the gutter. And yes, to report on celebrities in the gutter too, Hugh Grant. Why should Hugh Grant's gutter lifestyle be kept a secret? By the state. Because that's exactly what he's asking for. Let me read to you at some length from the midnight deal cooked up by Britain's gutter politicians. Seriously, if they can call tabloids the gutter press, why can't politicians be called the gutter politicians? I mean, it's those same politicians and celebrities that provide the lascivious fodder for the tabloids, isn't it? The thing I must point out to you is the title of this law, this Royal Charter, which shall become impossible to revoke. It's a government law enacted by the state with its powers, and yet it's called, get this, the Royal Charter on Self-Regulation of the Press. How hilarious is that? A government law called the Self-Regulation of the Press. George Orwell, the great British author, in his book 1984, told how language was the first casualty of oppression. How in his novel, The Department of War, was renamed the Ministry of Peace, for example. I mean, could you imagine a new law imposing rules on the media being called self-regulation? Well, let me quote from the Royal Charter. Quote, all those parts of the press which are significant news publishers should become members of an independent regulatory body. Again, I love that independent part because these people are selected by a government commission. Significant news publishers, eh? Well, there are 2 million people in the United Kingdom who regularly read the New York Times. Are they bound by this new law too? That's the absurdity of a censorship and press regulation law in the age of the internet. Well, what can this independent group of self-regulators do? Why, let's quote the law. They have the power to direct the nature, extent, and placement of corrections and apologies should lie with the board. Hang on. I thought that newspapers had editors who made those decisions about what newspapers say. If people don't like what the editors do, they can just not read the paper, or if they were truly wrong, they can sue in defamation law, or if they were phone hacked, they can go to the cops. But this isn't about that. This isn't about enforcing the law. This is about having political censors appointed by a state apparatus who can tell newspapermen to apologize even if they don't mean it or want to. In other words, if there is a difference of opinion between the newspaper and this government agency, the newspaper is not allowed to have its different opinion. So it traffics in ideas and thoughts, this regulator, and it has the power of police. Look, have sufficient powers to carry out investigations, both into suspected serious or systemic breaches of the code and failures to comply with directions of the board. Those who subscribe must be required to cooperate with any such investigation. Oh, investigations, eh? And you're required to cooperate, eh? So people who police ideas and thoughts. Yeah, Orwell called that one 70 years ago. He called it thought police. And what are the penalties for angering the thought police? Quote, financial sanctions up to 1% of turnover, that's what they call revenue in the UK, attributable to the publication concerned, with a maximum of £1 million. £1 million fine. That's like $1.5 million, enough to shut down a company. And there's an incentive for these thought police to become hunter-killers because the more fines they levy, the more cops they can hire, the bigger their budget. Look at this. The enforcement fund into which receipts from financial sanctions could be paid for the purpose of funding investigations. Imagine if real cops worked that way, if they got paid based on the number of people they arrested, not just a quota system, but on commission. But this isn't just for newspapers and TV stations, it's for websites, like blogs, like maybe even your Facebook page. Quote, a website containing news-related material is covered. You think I'm kidding when I say it applies to your Facebook page? Think again. Here's the definition. News-related material means news or information about current affairs, opinion about matters relating to the news or current affairs, or gossip about celebrities, other public figures, or other persons in the news. Do you ever share gossip on your Facebook page about Ashton Kutcher or Kim Kardashian? Well, then the government of the United Kingdom says you ought to be regulated. Do you have a Facebook friend in the UK? Do they get your updates that you make here in Canada? Guess what? Your Facebook page is covered by this law. Show me how it's not. What? You think a deal cooked up at 2:30 a.m. is well thought out? The United Kingdom isn't the only place like this. Julia Gillard, the Socialist Prime Minister of Australia, has introduced the, quote, new media self-regulation bill. That's pretty much the same thing. She wants a public interest media advocate to be a new inquisitor. A question, Just because you call a human being, with all of our human flaws and biases and partisan leanings and grudges and feuds and prejudices, just because you call such a person a public interest advocate, do you think that person magically acquires a saintly holiness and neutrality? But that's not even the point. That just goes to the hilarity of the Orwellian language here, public interest, self-regulation. The point is that it's impossible to find a neutral person to regulate the media because we all have different tastes. Two people can disagree, will disagree, on what's fair or even what's accurate. If there's a serious problem, go to court. That's how it's been for centuries. But no longer in Australia or the United Kingdom if these laws are passed by their respective parliaments. The UK's political system is called the mother of parliaments because it was the model by which so many other parliaments around the world were built, and our legal systems and our rule of law and our civil liberties too. But it's bigger than parliament. It's about the natural rights of man. It's about our very culture, our civilization. The freedom of expression is an even more central principle of the United Kingdom than parliament is. In fact, you can see that in the coinage of the word parliament, which comes from the word to speak. John Stuart Mill's great thesis on liberty. John Milton, the great poet and author of Areopagitica, the best defense of free speech ever written back in 1644, not long after William Shakespeare's time. William Shakespeare, who lived in the same time, the same London, the same city that the amazing King James Version of the Bible was written. A great work of history and literature and theology, but also a great work of religious freedom and freedom of the press. This is the United Kingdom. This is the Britain that now, in the dead of night, would sell out its birthright? Why? So that Hugh Grant can get drunk without worrying that a picture of it will show up on TMZ? We are not immune to this thuggish instinct to censor here in Canada, and we are certainly not immune to cooking up smiling excuses for the real purposes of censorship. Just last month, our own Supreme Court unanimously ruled in favor of censorship for very Hugh Grant-like reasons. In the Bill Whatcott case, they all agreed that the counterfeit right not to be offended trumps freedom of speech or religion, even trumps the truth. Hugh Grant would be pleased with our court. Powerful people would be pleased with our court. Because powerful people already have power and golden reputations. And the only thing a nosy journalist could do with his free speech is jeopardize that, right? Britain's most principled defender of freedom of speech is George Igler. He's the director of the Discourse Institute, and he joins us now from London. George, is this press bill, this press act, really as dangerous as I think it is?
Oh, extraordinarily so, Ezra. What we're looking at is the culmination of a 20-month process aimed at dealing with criminal misconduct by the press. But what things are really looking like at the moment is an attempt by vested interests really to muzzle free speech as represented by a free press. And so what we have now in Britain is the prospect of a new entity that is going to coerce people, possibly even bloggers, to be part of a press regulatory code of conduct with punishments ranging up to £1 million fines.
Well, here's what's so incredible to me is that the actual voicemail hacking is covered by criminal problems. And, of course, some of the newspapers involved paid millions of dollars in civil payments also. So there was a justice that was brought, even if it was slow. But this seems to have sneaked in with that. This seems completely unrelated to voicemail hacking. Who would truly be behind this? I mentioned Hugh Grant because he doesn't like his lascivious lifestyle being covered by a vigorous press. But who else in London might prefer to have the press on a leash, George?
Well, we're talking about corporatist interests. Certain Russian oligarchs have been named. Certain members of the House of Lords have been named. It's quite interesting to note that the proposals from the Leveson inquiry, which was the inquiry that gave birth to this legislative fudge that this new regulator will going to be. One of its requirements is that in future, a journalist will not be able to talk anonymously to politicians or to policemen. They'll be required to log communication intensively. But at the same time, the lobby group by the name of Hacked Off, that is lobbying extraordinarily hard and successfully to get these proposals introduced, is completely refusing to reveal who's funding it.
Well, I mean, you make a good point about Russian oligarchs because, of course, they make their money in Vladimir Putin's Russia, but they prefer to keep it in London where they buy $20, $30, $50 million flats. And I would imagine they don't like the paparazzi any more than Princess Diana did. Tell me what kind of newspaper coverage today may be illegal in the future?
Well, the whole issue really is, Ezra, that it's not just newspaper coverage. The point is that the proposed charter uses a particular word. It is relevant publishers. And this wording, relevant publishers, is so broad as to include the internet, include bloggers, include anyone who might have what is termed to be news media directed at a UK audience. Now, the issue in the UK has always been, is the rich has pretty much been able to get from the press what they want by using the libel courts. Most nearly everyone who's rich chooses to become a libel tourist in the courts of the UK. However, what seems to have been happening is, under the guise of helping the small guy who was affected by this hacking and by terrible criminal activity by the press, certain interests are going to be able to challenge press organizations that would have had the money to be able to get into libel court, and now won't be able to do so anymore. So it's an extraordinarily broad-ranging and vague fudge, really, which is why so many people and so many organizations are actively concerned by this really quite worrying move.
Well, George, you say so many organizations or people are concerned. I'm not sure if it's quite as widespread as that, because I think that these days freedom of speech is rather out of favor. Let me ask you, how could it come to pass that the three leading parties agreed to this midnight deal? Where are the left-wing civil libertarians from the Vietnam era, the Watergate area? Where are the conservative free speech defenders? How could all the parties collude this way? Will this pass Parliament?
Well, the whole point is that it kind of doesn't have to pass Parliament. The initial concern was that press regulation would fall under parliamentary control. So the fudge is to create a royal charter to exploit the fact that we have a constitutional monarchy. So this charter will produce an organization that in turn will be allegedly independent of political influence. But what you say about the political left and the left-wing press is absolutely apposite. There are a few people, Nick Cohen, Index on Censorship, there are definitely organizations that are really fighting this, but it has been politicized. It has been politicized, quite unfortunately, to the extent to which that if you are standing up for free speech and if you are opposing these measures, you're painted as a sort of a shill of right-wing press barons rather than someone genuinely concerned about the awful consequences that could result to this.
I read Boris Johnson's beautiful piece in The Telegraph where he said freedom of speech is what kept London strong. Do you think the lights are going out in the United Kingdom? Do you think its 400, 500-year experiment with freedom of speech is coming to an end?
I think so. I'm not quite as blasé. I think we only really have had genuine free speech in this country from about 1817, 1820, when criminal libel ceased to become an offence. But I think we've just genuinely so lost touch with the enormous boons and the enormous benefits economically and philosophically and intellectually that free speech gives us, that in the guise of doing everything to make sure people aren't offended, we're losing the most precious inheritance of our civilization.
What a sad and troubling note to end on. George Igler, thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.